Hi there, welcome to the Carr Brothers Show. It's episode 138. I'm Jack.
And I'm Jeff. And unfortunately, Jody couldn't be with us tonight. He has a previous commitment, so hopefully we'll see him back again next week or the week after.
That would be great. That would be great. 138 shows were broadcasted on CHCO TV, on Shaw, Rogers, and Bell. That's carried on all of those providers and on Facebook and our YouTube channel. We are very pleased to have back Dr. Tom Bateman with the St. Thomas University, a political scientist, quite often in the news and always asked to commentate and give your analysis on politics. So we're very happy to have you back.
Great to be here, gents.
I think it was, I do know actually, it was episode 29 back November the 4th, 2020 that we had you on. So that's hard to believe, 4.5 years ago. So great to have you.
Great to be here.
Well,
and that would have been just after the 2020 election, I believe. It would have been in that time frame that the 2020 election happened. We had a minority government in 2018 here in the province, and then we went a little bit earlier in 2020.
That's right. That was the first election in Canada since the COVID crisis began.
Right, it was.
Yes.
Right. And we were doing very well in the polls because of the way that the public perceived that we handled COVID. And the restrictions at that time, I think Blaine's approval ratings then were at 80% or something.
That's true.
Astronomical
Yeah,
like that.
I think he led the premiers in the ratings across Canada that summer.
Yep. So we went to an election then and gained our majority, and the rest was history.
a lot has happened since then.
A lot has happened since then. That's right. So yeah, glad to have you on. And I'm sure back in those days, that's what we were talking about was provincial election and how that's went and how COVID affected our lives drastically. And I think I do also remember discussing how classroom time was going at the university and things like that at the time. Thinking back now, I think we talk a little bit about that because it would have been the start of another school year and
That's true.
And whatnot. So things have changed drastically since then. We're now into a federal election, a handful of days in. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives were looking like up until about even a month, 6 weeks ago, it was a slam dunk. Everything was going their way. It was a change election. Trudeau needed to go. Trudeau since resigned. Mark Carney is now the prime minister, and here we are. It looks like a dogfight in much of the country. So, Dr. Bateman, with your background in political science, are you seeing some trends of how these have gone before when the momentum switches just drastically like that?
Have you ever seen anything like that before?
This is, I think, as big a swing as I have ever remembered. And I find it really, really interesting for a lot of reasons. One of them is that it looks like so much of the Conservatives' support going into 2025 was because of Justin Trudeau's extraordinary unpopularity. And it would be easy to say, oh, the Liberals, they're terrible, and so on and so forth. That would, I think, mischaracterize it. It looked like Mr. Trudeau was really, really unpopular. And to the extent that the Conservatives thought that they had an irreversible lead, it was probably because they thought that Canadians were really down on the Liberals and that Trudeau was part of that. In fact, the revival of the polling numbers for the Liberals or for Carney suggests that the guy at the top of a political party is really, really important now. And so many voters now are making their decisions not on the basis of the local candidate, maybe not even so much on the issues, not as much on the party label, but actually on the personality, the qualities, the impact, the media savvy of the leader of a political party. That's, I think, what is extraordinary that we're witnessing right now.
It is. And it is a different time. Like, this is a different timing for an election, tariff crisis, unknowns south of the border. So maybe that's changed what people are looking at as somebody at the top and the leader. Because I know when we would run provincially, a lot of times, we would hold seats when we go into opposition in our areas. And a lot of people would say, well, we're not really crazy about your leader, but we like you and what you do. But maybe at a federal level where the ridings are so large as well, and it's a federal it's casted nationwide that people are looking at the leaders.
Yeah, federal politics is more in the media rather than on the ground. I think in provincial politics, the issues are quite local. MLAs really do make a difference in the lives of their constituents, and so they are more important in the provincial voting decision. But yeah, the issues are more abstract. They're national. They're big. They're distant, and I think that makes a difference on the relationship between the leader of a party and the local MPs and candidates, and how they deal with the constituents. So. Yeah, that's important. I guess the other kind of related point is just how soft is the support many political parties have at the federal level. The NDP has plummeted.
Yes.
The Bloc Québécois going down. The Liberals have shot right up to 42% territory, which is majority territory if it holds. And the Conservatives have slipped. But when pollsters ask respondents, how committed are you to the party you intend to vote for? It turns out that 2/3, 70% of people who intend to vote Conservative are really committed to voting Conservative. The comparative number for Liberals is about 16%.
No kidding.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So very soft numbers for Liberals. Like they're the place you go to maybe in a storm, but you don't want to stay there.
Right.
Well, and it is interesting then. I mean, polls are polls, but I mean, in that huge of a swing, I mean, where there's some smoke, there's got to be some legitimacy to the popularity switch. But it just shows you then, as your point, is that it's still volatile out there in these next few weeks. Yep. So it's still I shouldn't say anyone's, probably be between the Conservatives and the Liberals, but it's not a done deal yet for Carney and the Liberals.
No, absolutely, because the other shoe to drop here is that if support for political parties is soft, then campaigns do matter.
Right.
So we've got 3-4 weeks ahead of us where a lot of differences can be made. And Mr. Carney, I think, has the attraction of someone who's kind of new and doesn't have a lot of baggage, and people are not kind of tired of looking at him all the time. And he looks like he's kind of a steady hand banker, he's not kind of like a nutcase and all that kind of stuff. So that's like an instant kind of appeal. But that can change. His French is not that good. The Liberals need seats in Quebec. He has not been really confronted by the media that much yet. In fact, his people have trying to kept him away from it.
Him.
That's gonna change, and so a lot can happen. Absolutely.
Now, I'm not sure. I don't think they in New Brunswick provincial elections you can vote every day at the returning offices.
Too, I think
you can federally. So that's
at any returning office anywhere in the province.
So crucial. First off, I'm going to get to the point about Mark Carney calling an election right away, but that's where it's crucial to get, because it's volatile. You get your voter ID, you get your votes to the voters station, to the returning office to get those votes. And once they vote for you, then if the campaign goes a little sour, well, they can't change their vote. So even more crucial to try to get for campaigns to get your supporters in to the ballot, get them there,
get them early.
That's true. And the TV debates are late in the this campaign. Right. I think they're within a week or 10 or something days of the end.
There's sometime in April.
So that's going to be like an important feature of the campaign. It's quite late. People may want to wait a little bit until they see what this is all about.
Usually they do, yeah.
And it also means that a leader who missteps doesn't have much time to recover from it.
Right. It makes it even more vital for the debate. You can't slip up. So that's key. And that's my other question is, do you think that Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, made the right choice by calling it, because we've had different examples over the years, calling the election right away rather than waiting until the fall?
Yeah. Well,
good question, right?
Yeah. We'll see if it was a good decision
in a few weeks.
In a few weeks, but it makes sense for him to have done this. Of course, we have fixed election date legislation at the federal level and the provincial levels, but almost every politician has made a mockery of those, and this is another instance of that. I would say Mr. Carney was probably told that his numbers are really good and they're probably not going to get a whole lot better. So go to the polls earlier rather than later. Go to the polls before Parliament has to reconvene. If it reconvenes, you need a speech from the throne. You need like a cabinet that looks like it's going to govern, and you're going to have to prepare a budget. But you're also going to be vulnerable to a defeat on a non-confidence motion. That's not really super duper going into a campaign. And so those are all, I'm sure,
factors.
Parts of the calculation. And I think Mr. Carney had his issue given to him. It's Mr. Trump, and it's tariffs, and the the amazing fractured relationship with the United States. Canada's best friend, best trading partner, best destination for people who want to go on holidays, and on and on and on. And I just think here's the issue, and it's from the outside. We're clearly the victims. This is fantastic. This is my campaign.
Oh, absolutely, and I agree with you. He had to call it before Parliament resumed.
I think so.
The Conservatives are so well versed in question period. They ask really difficult questions, and for a rookie like Carney to go in and try to answer some of those questions,
good point.
Easily tripped up, and then you spend the rest of your day out in, I guess we call it the rotunda, but in Ottawa, you go out into the gallery and you have to speak to the media, and it just creates a whole lot of other stories that he doesn't need. So I think he had to go. He had no choice. Poilievre would have probably did a number on him in question period, and then you get into committee work and all the other speeches,
the strategies
and
around that.
trying to keep everybody herded together and on the same message. I don't think you have much of a choice. Does it help us with the tariff fight? I don't think it matters if they go now or if they went later. At some point in time, there's going to be an election, and Trump is still going to be the president.
Yeah. So. On the budget question, the government has the capacity to pass what are called special warrants. These are just deployments of money which are retroactively approved by Parliament later. The other thing is that Mr. Carney is the first prime minister never having been elected to an office before.
Right.
He has no idea what Commons procedure, I'm sure, is. And so he would be very vulnerable sitting on the front bench in question period.
And I've noticed a lot of his comments when he's at the podium or at scrums, he'll in the last few days you might as well try to use that as a strength of saying, he has no political experience, and that's a good thing. That's a fresh thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a populist strain in contemporary politics, which says that if you've been in politics before, then you are probably corrupt, and or otherwise just simply bought into the system, and you are more inclined to represent the system to the constituent rather than the constituent to the system, and so that's no good. And so if you have no political experience, then maybe that's a good thing, and. I understand the motivation for that, but it's actually not a bad thing to understand how laws are passed, have some experience reconciling different positions on different public policy issues, how to deal with difficult people, to know stuff about the history of the country, things we've tried before and failed. And all those little details that make up a good politician. On balance, it's good to have those things rather than not have them.
No, absolutely. I too agree with that. I've seen leaders in this province say that I'm no politician, so you should elect me as premier or leader or whatever. And sometimes it's refreshing for people, but I also believe you need to have some experience at it, especially at that level. Oh my goodness! At that level, it's important. No matter and the longer you're elected, the more terms you serve. Especially if you've been in government or not, or cabinet or not, then you've supported certain policies that maybe change, or your ideology on that's changed in sometime in the future. But this still sticks to you.
Yep.
That's the way it is. Like I see the opposition or the government talking about Pierre Poilievre and how he voted in the past on certain policies. Well, that was the past, but he had that experience that he lived, that he took from that, and now it's the present.
Yep. Yeah, both parties play
Spirits
that
game.
game. Oh, you said that then. Now you're saying it now. So you're actually like a flip-flopper and so on and so forth. It's possible that someone can have learned
Absolutely.
over time.
kidding.
And that, now I see the merit of the position that I used to oppose, blah, blah, blah. Hard to explain that in 15 seconds before a camera.
Well, and not only that, to explain it in 15 seconds to a camera, but explain that to somebody that's just starting to pay attention to politics now. And they hear, oh, well, you're a flip-flopper, or you did this in the past, and to explain that to somebody that's, because there's a number of people.
The last provincial election we saw a lot of new people to politics, voters and things, and I think we're seeing that in the federal too.
We are seeing it. I'm seeing it on Facebook a lot in my rural areas here.
Which is good.
It is good, but having historic knowledge is good too. But
yes, I know.
So. Well, that's a quick first segment.
Yeah.
Let's go to CHCO's public service announcements, and we'll be right back with you with Dr. Tom Bateman right after these messages.
Welcome back to the Carr Brothers Show, episode 138. We're so pleased to have Dr. Tom Bateman with St. Thomas University in Fredericton, political scientist, having him in and talking about politics, of course, and the federal election. Very topical, right a few days into it. And we, in the first segment, talked about the drastic switch and swing of the polls. I know they're only polls, but there was quite a remarkable switch from something in the teens to now 40-some% for the Liberal Party. The Conservative Party, they didn't dip down a whole lot, but one of the big stories I think and not a whole lot of attention is the crash of the NDP. I'm not surprised myself because of Jagmeet Singh flip-flopping all the time in the last couple of years, but that is key, isn't it? When you have a softer NDP turnout.
Yeah, the NDP in Canadian politics is the party most victimized by what's called strategic voting. And an NDP voter won't like the Liberals, but will really, really dislike the Conservatives. And if there's a race in a riding in which the Conservatives are close to toppling the Liberal, then the NDP voters will swing to the Liberals to block the Tories. And that hurts the NDP, but it makes the worst outcome impossible from their point of view. And I think there's a little bit of that going on in this election campaign.
Thomas Mulcair, the former federal leader of the NDP, his latest column earlier this week actually encouraged NDPers to vote for the Liberals.
Yeah,
I thought that's a big statement. But I remember I ran in when I ran in Grand Lake in 2006. There were about 5 of us that lost by around 200 votes, give or take, or less. And in those ridings, including my riding in Grand Lake, the NDP really collapsed. And I think they only had, say, maybe 300 votes, 200 votes, something really dismal that would normally be 900.
Yes.
Well, I lost by 230 or 40 votes. That was very key. When you have a strong NDP candidate, that helps the conservatives and progressive conservatives.
Yep, that's true. And also, I think, Mr. Singh perhaps made some poor choices, and forming such a close relationship with the Liberals, and with Mr. Trudeau sort of campaigning and governing like as much as he could to the left of the NDP, that turned the NDP into a bit of a lapdog, and I think that disgruntled some inside the NDP, and others looking in said, what are these guys?
A lot of credibility lost.
I think so.
In my first election in 2014 here in this riding, May Foreman was the NDP candidate, and she did extremely well. I think she probably got 14 to 1,500 votes, a third.
Oh, okay.
Mike Pearson was second, and I only won by 850. So if it wasn't for a strong NDP at that time, I may not have won my first election.
Well, there you go. And talk about a swing. Not to brag as the younger brother, but in 2010, 2010, I won by 2,600.
Exactly.
And then you won by 800. That's quite a drop.
It was a change election, and Allward was on his way out. The government was on their way out, and I could have easily been very vulnerable if May Foreman wasn't on the ballot for the NDP at the time.
Maybe we'll be looking for Mr. Poilievre to say complimentary things about Mr. Singh and the NDP in the next couple of weeks.
I don't know. I put that genie back in the bottle.
Maybe not Singh, but maybe traditional New Democrats.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe not the leader, but maybe in general the party.
Yeah.
But the tariff discussion is just overshadowing any of that. Because I know, like yesterday, Pierre did, or one day this week, Pierre Poilievre did talk about workers and workers' rights and protecting workers, and that's an NDP mantra normally.
Yes, it is.
But is it getting all that message getting overshadowed by everybody waking up to see what?
Yeah,
Trump's
there's a
do
couple
next?
things. I think it's a really good observation, and since really I don't know 10, 15 years ago, the populist right has looked at workers as a very fertile electoral ground, because these are the people, like in the Rust Belt of the United States, manufacturing people, not a lot of education, but they got skills, working on the lines and so on and so forth. They're the ones that were really hurt by globalization and all that kind of stuff. And so the Tea Party was kind of the beginning of it, but Trump and company and some of his intellectual supporters really started to think about a Republican electoral coalition that would involve American workers, and it meant like a change of attitude toward unions from the old Republican country club kind of view to this newer populist Republican kind of outlook, and saying that the workers are socially conservative. Like they're not progressive types like the left parties are, and they are interested in economic growth and so on and so forth, and so they're kind of like ripe for the picking. And I think some people on the conservative side of the spectrum kind of like have noticed this, and have been trying to position themselves to make a play for that labor vote. Mr. Poilievre, I think, is trying to do that, and I would say the tariff threat from the United States simply increases the attractiveness of that kind of play. It's crowded territory because everybody now is defending the auto workers and other unionized workers against the American threat. But I would say Mr. Poilievre is in there too, scrapping to see what he can get.
Because there was just a big union with 11 to 15,000 members, Boilermakers, just endorse Poilievre. They did. And the Conservative, that's a big endorsement at the start of the campaign. And then with Trump this week, today or yesterday, last night, announcing the 25% tariff on cars and vehicles. That, like you said, Tom, that just brings that more to light. And then also with the everyday middle class worker, Carney's brand or persona really isn't. It's more elite. Let's face it. $6-8 million stocks with shares with Brookfield, sort of thing. That's not really the image of the blue collar middle class worker.
True.
So.
Yeah, he's the Davos bureaucrat who's been the central bank head in 2 different countries. This is not a resume most of us can identify with.
So Carney's strategy and the Liberals, I would say, would be to try to keep it as much and pivot into the ballot question that they would prefer, which I think has helped them, as you mentioned, is on Trump and the U.S. tariffs. I think that would be should be his strategy. But do you think, and he hasn't called Trump, even as new prime minister, Trump hasn't called him. But I'm wondering if he's holding off, saving that in his tickle trunk to use that later on in the campaign to bring that, because that'll be a news story and things like that. Keeps the Trump issue there. I wonder if he's holding off calling with that, but I guess we can only speculate. But
yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question, and I don't think anybody wants to appear to be a supplicant to the president right now. Mr. Trudeau tried it. Mr. LeBlanc tried it. Christopher Freeland tried it, and it didn't work out that well. And it didn't produce much benefit as far as we can tell so far. So it's not like you can placate him and say nice things to him and expect him to go easy on you or something like that. Like I don't think we have any idea what could change his mind. actually.
I don't know. If
I
he knows.
have a couple of possibilities, and that is that if his numbers in American politics tank, and if the stock indices like really tank for a long time, and if big business people really start to yell at him, maybe something's going to happen. But criticisms from other countries, I think it energizes him. It doesn't do the opposite. So that would be a good reason for Mr. Carney not to pick up the phone.
Yeah, I don't think he can afford to get bruised up by that phone call or visit down there. We saw what happened to Zelensky when he went to visit, and it didn't end well for anybody, really.
Risky.
And that was just so
Very
theatrical
risky.
too. And I just think you have to, like, every time you meet with Mr. Trump, you know you're going into a TV studio, and it's kind of like some weird, professional wrestling match that you're going to get involved in, and so, like, just don't go.
Yeah, not the gain isn't there. It's too much of a risk, really, as well.
Really is.
The French debate. I don't believe there is one now. Mark Carney.
I think there is going to be
refused an
one.
invite to that. Oh, is there?
TVA, the private broadcaster in Quebec, invited the leaders for its own debate, and for some reason they're asking each leader to put in $75,000 in order to participate.
Oh my goodness!
Oh, I didn't know that.
We should write a letter. See if they want to come here and
on
do
the
a
Carr
debate.
Brothers show. We'll do it for 25.
That's right.
So that was the details around that. Okay.
And I like the 75 is kind of weird. But also it would expose Carney's relatively poor French. Not for me to criticize him, given my French.
Right.
But he probably just said, this is just not worth it. So he's going to hack his way through, I think, the consortium's French debate.
Oh, okay.
That's right.
And leave it at that.
Yeah, I listened to a podcast called The Curse of Politics, and they have a couple former liberal panelists on there. Well, they were with the Chrétien government and Paul Martin government, and then there's an NDP lady and a Conservative fellow, and they were talking about just that. Because they've all managed big campaigns before. The Conservative fellow, Corey Tonight, just managed Doug Ford's. And he said, well, if you go to 2 French debates, then you got to do 2 more English debates. And then it just, with 3 weeks left or 4 weeks left, by the time you go do your debate prep, you're spending all your time getting ready for debates. And with short time, you just can't do it. So they all agreed that Carney turning down that TVA one is probably what they all would have done, except for Blanchette. I'm sure he would have went anyways. It's probably what they all would have done.
He needs as many of those opportunities as he can get.
Yeah.
And the rest just can't spend their time there because they're crisscrossing the country. Blanchette is not. He's just focusing in Quebec where his vote is. So,
and he's in trouble too, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some of that. His numbers are going down. But going back to the discussion on the debates, I know as a candidate, former candidate, and you as well, we just don't have time to spend on a lot of debates.
Yeah, I know. It's people like me who like to get politicians to come in and do debates because it's an event and it's like an exchange of ideas and so on and so forth. But the incentives for the candidates are quite otherwise. I understand.
It is.
And then at a national level, it was mentioned with Carney being a new politician, just a lot riding on it. He's got probably the most to lose, where he's higher in the polls than anyone.
Oh, I would say it would be very intimidating to share the stage with Pierre Poilievre. This guy is born to debate. He is a master at it.
And I saw him. He was at an event. Not an event. It was a visit to the Village of Hope in Tracy, here in New Brunswick, and he did. I've got to say, I was impressed. He did a video. Sort of after on the side, just for himself, did a video.
Was he having an apple at the time?
No apple there. Okay. We've all seen that video too. But he recorded a video, one take in Bango, and just I have to smooth and just be able to rattle that off.
And do the background on the topic and the subject of Village of Hope. Just he's a natural. Yeah, he's a natural at it.
That's true, and he's a bit of a grump actually, so he's got to, I think, lighten up a little bit. Yeah. And I like there's a bit of a gender gap, eh? Like women are thinking like, I don't know about him. He's kind of a crusty, kind of harsh and crusty and a bit belligerent and so on and so forth. So he can maybe lighten up on that one a little bit. But his other problem has been some of the affinities that he has sort of given off with like Trumpism. Maybe not Mr. Trump exactly, but that kind of style.
It just leaves the door open for others to make those comparisons.
I think that's a good way of putting it. I think that's a good way of putting it. And you know, the Conservative Party base in Canada is in Alberta. One poll from about 3 or 4 weeks ago indicated that 90% of Canadians oppose Canada becoming the 51st state. No big surprise. In fact, I'm thinking like only 90, but anyway, it's 90.
Exactly.
And so that means 10 are kind of like okay with the idea or open to it or something, but that number is 20% in Alberta. And
it's staggering.
And another poll I came across suggested that about a third of the Conservative base is kind of Trumpist, like kind of favorable to his election, to his agenda, and to many of his policy planks. And so this is something Mr. Poilievre has to deal with, and it's going to be a challenge for him. And I think the pivot to Canadian nationalism, protection of Canada against the tariffs, that's part of the pivot. But I think voters will want to see more.
Well, look, that's what I was thinking too. Is I think there still has to be something to try to pivot out of where he was at. His, the common sense conservative slogan, the axe the tax. That was the sort of pre-Trudeau retirement. And I agree with you. I think something still has to happen to try to either Carney's going to there's going to be a sort of a mistake made on that side, which will open the door, or I'm sure they're strategizing and try to figure out how can they sort of dominate the message and gain traction. Because momentum is very important. So when you're losing momentum, you gotta switch her up.
And it takes some time to get that momentum to switch too during a campaign. Like it would take a week or two of messaging for that to switch people around, I'm assuming. So if they're going to get at it, they need to get at it soon, especially with advanced polls coming up on Easter weekend.
That's when they are. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
well, you made a good point about Alberta, or I guess maybe what we'll do is we'll talk about Alberta after this break.
Sure.
Because we're running out of the second
Alberta.
segment.
Maybe swing into some provincial politics a little bit and talk about individual ridings here with the Fredericton riding. The Liberals have just appointed their own candidate, and the St. John riding, St. John Canada Cases, I think it's called. And how they've appointed their Conservative candidate down there. So we'll talk about some of those contrasts when we come back, right after these messages from CHCO. Welcome back to the Carr Brothers Show. I'm Jeff, and I'm joined with my brother Jack.
Hi.
Dr. Tom Bateman from St. Thomas University, our brother Jody, the third of the three Carr brothers, could not be available today. He had a previous commitment. We've been talking about federal politics. We've been talking a little bit about geopolitics with the U.S. We're going to get into a little bit more of that. Talk about some individual riding in New Brunswick and how candidates have been chosen over time. And if we have a little bit of time, maybe we'll get into some provincial politics. But the hot topic of the week, obviously, and for the last number of weeks has been the swing in the polls with the federal politics and just who's going to deal with tariffs the best and how does Canadians see their way out of this. So, Jack, we had some interesting discussion in the first segment and the second segment as well, and we wanted to talk about a few other things with Dr. Tom Bateman.
Yeah, well, let's talk, Tom, about we saw a couple of cases here, a couple ridings where, two or three really, where candidates were selected by the leader, essentially. In St. John, Melissa Young, good candidate down there, against a popular incumbent now, back into the fold with the new leader, so Wayne Long. But Melissa was selected. They foregoed the nomination process. And then here in Fredericton, David Miles was, we didn't hear a whole lot about that once that was selected. I wonder why. But but he was acclaimed, not even acclaimed really. He was
just appointed by the leader. Yes.
Yeah, that's a better word for the Liberal Party here in Fredericton. And what are your thoughts about that? What are you hearing in the last few days from people?
Yeah, these are just sort of moments in a long story, I think, of centralization of power in the leadership offices of political parties in Canada. For generations, the local constituency associations in electoral districts really owned their own processes. They selected their candidates, and the rest of the party just had to go along with the local candidate selected by the local party. And this was like a really ground level, grassroots foundation of political parties, because it kept the local party vital. It kept local members important,
relevant,
and relevant, exactly. And so I think that was very important. That's what parties in Canada were built on. A really obscure change in Canadian electoral law happened in about 1971, and the decision was made that ballots should be constructed so that there's not only the name of the candidate, but also the party affiliation of that candidate on the ballot. Oh. And in some ways, I think that was kind of an unfortunate thing, because it meant then that people would not have to learn more about the candidates running and what they stood for, what party they were a part of. They just sort of had the information delivered to them on the ballot when they're voting. But in any case, that was a decision. But then, of course, you had to think how would we know that this candidate actually does represent this party? A candidate just can't declare that. And so there was a provision in our election law which said that the leader of the party authenticates the fact that this candidate will represent our party in this constituency in the election. Well, suddenly this gave the leader veto power over a constituency association's selection of a candidate. And it's been used in understandable cases where a riding nominates a candidate. That candidate is later learned to have done like really dumb, offensive, terrible things, or said terrible things earlier before the candidacy, and would be extremely awkward for the party. So then you can sort of veto a person that way. And in fact, parties now have got ahead of the game, and now they have so-called green light committees where they vet candidates even before they're allowed to run in a constituency nomination process. And all of which is to say there's a really big centrally coordinated vetting process before the local constituency association gets to have its say. And this is all part of a movement of power from below up to the top of party organizations, where the professionals are, where the pollsters are, where the advisors are, and where the leader is. And so in principle, the appointment of candidates in ridings to circumvent the local process is just a part of a much bigger story that's been unfolding now for several decades.
Over time. And
I think it is unfortunate, but it is the way it is. A lot of politicking now is through social media. It's very, very high level and ethereal in character, and we know that membership in political parties has atrophied greatly in the last several decades, and that process will continue apace. So, on the case of some candidates who have been appointed in this election campaign, a lot of the explanation is that this election campaign came up very, very quickly, for reasons having to do with change in leadership and probably an imminent confidence vote if Parliament were to meet. On and on it goes. And so the Liberal Party constitution says that I think it's at least 2 weeks have to elapse between the announcement of a meeting and the selection of the candidate. Well, 2 weeks would take us into the latter part of the campaign before a candidate would be
It's
selected.
unavoidable.
So that's why have these appointments, and I think there might be as many as 100 candidacies yet to be filled in the Liberal Party, and the NDPs, the Greens are in much the same position, and I think the Conservatives are in better shape than that.
Yeah, they're very close to having all their candidacies filled, I think. But like you say, sorry. Go
I
ahead.
was just going to say the Liberal Party. I could see them being strapped that way because we've seen where incumbents have come back with a new leader of Mark Carney, which it is favorable to have an incumbent. However, they also it was the decision of the Mark Carney to call it an early election. So it's hard to sort of
this is part of the collateral damage
Yeah.
that's connected with those other
It is.
decisions.
The Conservatives, I don't think, have any excuse of waiting for nominations. I mean, it's hard in a provincial election to be nominated. I was nominated back to 2006 again, but the election at that point then was announced a week before the writ dropped. And my nomination was between the announcement and the writ dropping. So it was in that week. And I had been campaigning for probably 9 months, 10 months, me and the other candidate. And that was very, very tough to recover. We had 500 people total in the nomination, but it took us 2 or 3 weeks to really get organized and get going and get, and bring over the supporters from the other candidate. And very, very hard. And we were in government, so that's... it was unnecessary to do that. When you're in government. And the Conservatives, well, we've known that there's an election. So it's hard enough, my point is, hard enough in a provincial to be a candidate, especially not an incumbent. Even harder because you have so many more voters, 8-10 times as many voters. So you need a good year to be nominated, to be the candidate, to get out there and to meet people. So to be appointed a week before during the election, that's tough. It's tough.
Yep, it is tough.
And not grassroots either.
The weird thing we have in Canada, of course, is these fixed election date rules, which make no sense when examined in light of our parliamentary system of government. But we have fixed election dates, and sometimes the politicians adhere to them, and most of the time they don't. But maybe some parties organize their nomination schedules in relation to the fixed election date schedules, which then may be ignored,
Right.
such as in this particular case.
Well, I think you touched on the Liberal side of it a little bit, Jack. Mark Carney called the election, and we know election readiness, part of that checklist is, are your candidates ready, and do you have enough candidates to go? So there were obviously, the risk of going into the House of Commons far outweighed the election readiness as far as Mark Carney was
I think that's
concerned.
really true,
It had to have been.
Yeah.
But we know that election readiness is part of it. The Conservatives and the PCs are normally very good on election readiness, and you can see it. Polyev had 100, and I think they were at 90% of their candidates chosen before the election was called. Now and it's all individual as well. So you have the St. John one, Melissa Young chosen as a candidate. But there were other people interested and had apparently their applications in. So that nomination could have been called far in advance if it wanted to be. Here in Fredericton, the Liberals chose David Miles. Brian McDonald's been nominated for a year. He's had a year to work at it. David Miles gets chosen 3 or 4 days into the campaign. There were 2 others, but like you say, Tom, their constitution says you need to wait 2 weeks, although there's probably a clause in there that says that they don't. They could have called and had the nomination this weekend or whatever. But that tells me in the Fredericton riding, the Liberals had written off the riding because they just didn't seem serious about either A, finding candidates to run, or B, until Carney was elected, maybe there was nobody interested.
Coming forward.
Right? So that could have been the case as well. So they could have still, though, you can still call a nomination date, and if there's people interested, they'll come out.
Sure.
They'll put their names forward.
Jenica Atwin, I think announced she was not running again well before Christmas.
She was one of the people that said that if Trudeau was still there, she wouldn't run again. And then she did solidify it after that and said that she wasn't running anyhow.
Correct.
So they've had some time
to
start putting the wheels in motion. And then we have the Miramichi riding where on the Conservative side, Mike Dawson was just appointed. as the Conservative candidate, left the legislature. But so it is all individual circumstances, because Jake announced late that he wasn't reoffering, so that really doesn't give them a lot of time to have a nominating convention. And Lisa Harris from the Liberal side might have been appointed as well. I'm not sure that I heard that there was any nomination date or any hoopla over that as well. So it's happening a lot.
Yes, it is.
It is individual circumstances, but some of them obviously can be avoided, like the St. John one, and some of them can't. At the end of the day, they have the power.
There might be some sort of Liberal Party inside baseball operating here too. One of the consistent criticisms of the Trudeau government era was that so many institutions around the Prime Minister's office atrophied. Everything became focused on the PMO, and the advisor is really close to Telford, for example, close to the Prime Minister. And I'm just wondering if even a lot of the party apparatus kind of atrophied during the period, because he was just sort of absent with an awful lot of things that leaders of parties and prime ministers of Canada usually do. And so maybe it's all been catch up since January the 6th when he announced his resignation.
For sure. Yeah. And I also want to clarify, though, because a lot of our viewers watching this will say, well, there was no nomination for Wayne Long, or there was no nomination for John Williamson or Richard Bragdon or any of the incumbents. But the major federal parties have a performance checklist for these MPs, sitting MPs over time. They have to demonstrate that they're visiting X amount of doors, that they have so much money raised, that their riding association, the board of directors, is in healthy shape. And if they don't meet all those criteria, then I've never seen it happen, but the party then can say, you're not automatically appointed as our candidate.
Yes. You
haven't been doing your job. We will have a contested nomination. And I think Wayne Long obviously fell into that category as a sitting MP for the Liberal side. I would say he checks all the boxes on the criteria that they would have put in place for him, so there'd be no nomination. He decided after Carney was elected, but for John Williamson, Rob Moore, Richard Bragdon, and these people that were
and long
sitting MPs and have done a great job, they would check all the boxes, knowing them and watching how they hold themselves and do their work in the ridings. They would check the box. So that they don't always have to have nominations, but there's criteria that needs to be met. When it's a new riding up for grabs, I always believe that there should be a nomination unless time constraints aren't there. When I had my nomination, when you had your nominations, there was some pretty good numbers of people in the room. And it was a grassroots momentum builder or possibility of one. And if you had the right time. So
when I had a contested nomination in 2006, should have held it a lot earlier than a week before the election. 2008, had a nomination, but no one else contested, so I like that.
But still had the open.
But at least it was open. You're right.
You won handily.
I did,
and there was a number of people there.
Yeah, there was.
There was a number of people there supporting.
But yes, contested nomination is great for the people and for the riding and for the parties and things. It's hard on the candidate, that's for sure. 2010 though, I was an incumbent. All the incumbents were, I guess, appointed. Didn't have to go through a contested nomination, but yeah, you had yours in 2014. So
had mine in 2014, and there was a number of open nominations for the PCs that year because there was a lot of open seats where the incumbents didn't reoffer. I think with your class there was 5 or 6 PC incumbents that didn't reoffer for different reasons. We were elected 2014 and 2018. There was the first time I've seen in a long time a contested nomination. In a riding where there was an incumbent.
Yeah.
So
Mike Holland and Brian Kirsten
beat Brian Kirsten in 2018, at their nomination. And Brian was an incumbent. He was elected when I was in 2014. So it happens if it's an open, fair, democratic process.
Yep.
There was a lot of surprised people in the room that night, but one person worked harder than the other, and that's just the way it is.
Yep, it's true.
Well, okay. Well, how much time do we have? I think we have a little bit of time.
We have 3 or 4 or 5 minutes maybe at the most.
Yeah,
and it goes by so darn quick that we can't even keep up to it. So
I know.
The director says 3 minutes.
Oh, well, there you go. So it's almost time to sort of wrap up then. If 3 minutes, that doesn't take very long. But anything else you'd like to add Mr. Bateman, on what we've discussed. I know it's hard in 3 minutes, but anything you'd like to add that we haven't touched on?
Well, one thing that came up in the break was Alberta.
Oh, yes.
And how Alberta is participating in the electoral campaign we're experiencing right now. And it all implicates Alberta's position in Confederation and Alberta's extraordinary resource wealth. And as a result of that, its special relationship with the United States, because Alberta has much more oil and gas than it can consume itself and that Canada can consume. Difficult getting its oil and gas to other parts of the Canada points east. And it's been very difficult for Alberta to get its oil and gas to markets other than the United States. And this involves the construction of pipeline capacity so that Alberta resources can be marketed to other markets in Southeast Asia. And if those markets were available to Alberta, Alberta would get a much higher per unit price of that energy because the United States is pretty much a sole buyer of American or Alberta energy exports. It's getting them at a discount, and it's costing Alberta. And when it's a non-renewable resource, you want to get the maximum you can for a unit of that resource because you're not getting it back. And it's been the Liberal government that has put a ton of roadblocks in the way of creating pipeline capacity to get the energy to market. And now Alberta's feeling kind of vindicated because now we see what it means to have been locked into one big market for our export capacity. In fact, this is Canada's problem. You know, we have 75-80% of all of our exports going to the United States, and boy, are we paying for it now.
We sure are.
And to retaliate against the tariffs, some of the Canadians are saying, yeah, we need to really limit our exports to the United States. Maybe we should even ban energy exports to the United States. Well, this is what makes the Albertans crazy. And I think Danielle Smith is going to create a national unity problem in this country if the federal government doesn't play its cards adroitly in managing the Canada-U.S. relationship and also keeping Alberta on side at the same time. Alberta is playing according to a different playbook, and it will make things, I think, a little bit more complicated for the federal government in this evolving Canada-U.S. relationship.
And I don't think she's going to quiet down any. Doug Ford seems to kind of tone her down a little bit, but I don't think Danielle Smith's going to. So she's the.
It doesn't appear that way yet. Nope.
She's the mystery of the.
That's true.
How this campaign's going to go.
But like you say, if 10 years ago, basically Trudeau and his cabinet blocked any of those avenues to get oil to market.
Yep.
We had an east-west, west-east pipeline all ready to go through the environmental process, and they made it so stringent, policy-wise, to have it done that. Yeah. The companies picked up and left, and so here we are.
Yeah.
Trudeau's gone, but the same cabinet members are basically all in play.
Yeah. And even François Legault, the Premier of Quebec, who is dead against any kind of pipeline going through Quebec, has said, yeah, maybe we'll think of considering, looking at it, and so on and so forth. He softened his position on the east-west.
The door's open. Well, it's been an exciting 1 hour here on the Carr Brothers Show. We want to thank you, Dr. Bateman, for being here today on a snowy afternoon. And for Jack and myself, and like I say, Jody couldn't be with us here tonight. We'll see you again next week on the Carr Brothers Show on CHCO. Have a great weekend, and good night.
Good night.